Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury Rutch.
And I'm Spoon Phillips.
And we have something really cool to talk about and someone really cool to talk about it with. Spoon, why don't you introduce our guest today?
Well, our guest is an old friend of Maury and Spoon's, going back a good ways. He's been at Martin Guitar for quite a while, wearing a variety of different hats. And he's known to many people around the world. And it is Michael Dickinson.
He's in the building!
Welcome, Michael.
Welcome. Thank you. So old hurts. But yeah, I've been around a long time at Martin Guitar. I'm getting ready to... I get 32 years in, getting ready to complete year number 33 is coming up in September.
Wow.
I started there, we had a sawmill where, we were buying logs from various countries all over the world. And my job initially was stuff would come out of the sander. I was allowed to pick it up and put it down. And I did that for a couple of months. Yeah, and then they sent me over to the North Street building, what was known as Woodworker's Dream. We used to sell, pre-sawn lumber, all sorts of sizes, all sorts of species to woodworkers, and we did guitar kits for up-and-coming wannabe luthiers. All sorts of regulations changed, and we went strictly and became the guitar makers connection. So I made guitar parts out of hunks of wood. I bent sides. I glued stuff together and assembled kits for people who wanted to build their own guitars. And I also, in doing that, learned how to build and repair instruments. And then from there, I went into the customer service department. I spent most of, answering phone calls and emails from people all over the world, everything. I joke. The number one question was, how do I date my guitar? And my answer would always be, you bring it flowers and some candy. Ching. Yeah, right. And I was there for about 10 years, and then this weird job came up, and it said something like, go to foreign places, look at our wood supply, open up supply chains for wood, 25% of the time you'll be traveling. And I went, this sounds cool. I mean, yeah, I'll go to a mill in Canada, I'll go to a mill in Alaska, I'll go to a mill in the southern U.S., and I believe my first official trip was to Finland for some thing, and then about a month later I was in the forests of Cameroon hunting ebony trees. So it's a little different than what I expected, and I've been doing that now, I think it's 12 years. I've been the official sourcing specialist for lumber and timber for Martin Guitar.
I had no idea you've been doing that long. That's fantastic.
I remember when that happened. When you're hunting ebony trees, do you have to sneak up on them?
Yes, you have to be very, very quiet.
So you mentioned the North Street building. A lot of people don't know that you were referring to the original site of Martin Guitar that was behind the old Martin house. That's still there. And how many years did you actually work in that building?
12? No, 10.
And a lot of people don't know that building kind of extends past that small building in the front. Did you ever make any unusual discoveries, like up in the attics or down in the basements, like old Martin memorabilia from the old days?
Yeah, surprisingly so. There's 3 floors to that building. Well, technically 4, because there is an attic. But the 3rd floor was just boxes full of stuff. And they hired a cleaning crew to, literally, they opened up the window and were just throwing boxes into a dumpster. Yeah, and one night I'm in dumpster, after hours and then pulling out old forms from the 1800s, the 1830s and 40s, original drawings from CF the First, and a bunch of other stuff. And at that point, I was a newbie there, but I called up Dick Boak right away at that time, and I said, hey, we might want some of this stuff. And he came over, and together we worked in the dumpster and pulled out everything we deemed, antique and vintage and needed to be saved.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah, I had a feeling you were going to say something to that effect because I heard stories about stuff that was just neglected and covered in dust and stuff on that building, in the places people didn't normally go. You also were involved in customer service for quite a while, so you were wearing multiple hats at the same time throughout a lot of that time period, yes?
Yeah, during the customer service years is when I started getting involved with the museum. When we knew we were going to expand, when we knew we were getting close to the 175th anniversary, and Chris said, it was either build a new building somewhere or expand the existing one, he purposely went and set up and said, no, we're going to, his quote was, we're going to tell the Martin story. Because if anybody's was at the original, not the original factory on North Street, but the original Sycamore place, the museum was 2 rooms. One was like 12 by 12 and the other one was like 8 by 12, and there were maybe a dozen instruments in there. The other stuff Chris and Mike Longworth and Dick Boak had collected over the years was just sitting on shelves collecting dust. So, yeah, when the new museum was starting to be designed, Chris said, I need somebody who knows something about really old Martin guitars and my company's history. And I just sort of like raised my hand and went, ooh, sir, me.
You want to hear a funny story about that? You just gave me goosebumps. As far as talking about that small room where the original museum was just a couple of rooms, the last time I stood in that bigger of the 2 rooms was when Sandy and Charlene gave me the news that, yes, I could become a Martin dealer. My application was granted. That's the last time I stood in that place. That was awesome.
Wow.
That would have been a good trivia question.
So does that make you old too?
Wow, you're older than I thought you were.
Oh,
Exactly.
I don't know if I would say old.
Well, you young whippersnappers, I remember Michael and I go back through, we have several things in common. One was The Simpsons, and which Maury always liked a lot too, so we used to send each other Simpsons stuff, and occasionally still do. And when Mike became...
No!
When Michael became moved into the wood procurement, that year they were having a special event for the Martin's Owners Club that was replacing what we used to call Martin Fest, and at least at that time. And Mike was stationed in front of the new museum. The museum was pretty new at that time, and to hand out literature and stuff. And I brought him a present, and his boss at that time saw me and asked me what I was doing, and I showed it to him, and he still has it, and I've seen photo evidence that he still wears it in the jungle. I bought him an old-fashioned safari pith helmet to take with him on his journeys.
Yes.
It doesn't protect you from spider bites, as I understand, but
No.
but
Yeah, there was it in for repair or was it a custom guitar?
no, it was my custom.
Yes, and I filled an old case up with parts from the repair department that they had pulled off of like a broken neck. Some guy had tried drywall screwing together a top that had had a foot put through it, and I gathered all these parts and I put it in the case, and a mutual friend of ours was going to deliver it, dropped it off, and drove around the block, I think, before Todd realized what had just happened to him. Yeah. So.
Yes, but he pulled up in the big city traffic, so I had to run down and grab it. And thanks a lot, and run back up and go up, and up and back. And it was a good ways away good time later that I opened it. That was even the first one, because I have to say, these were actually retaliations for practical jokes that I had played on Michael at times,
Yes.
and the people at the custom shop. And the first time I had leaked some photos online of the actual custom shop, and it was really like photographs of Homer Simpson, and it was very funny stuff that apparently custom shop didn't find too funny. So Mike shows up at the Barton Fest with my new custom, and it was a bag full of burnt wood and a
Yes.
charred neck.
Yes.
You guys are terrible.
So we have a history about this stuff. But speaking of wood, I know you've gone to India, you've gone to Africa, you've gone to Central America, and other places. You were also involved in going to Scandinavia related to Martin exploring and getting into wood torrefaction, what ultimately led to their vintage tone system. Weren't you involved in that in some respect as well?
Yeah, because yes, I was. I went over to Finland to a wood seminar that was basically about sustainability and using other products. And there was a gentleman over there who was torrefying birch, and so I talked to him. He gave me the basic lowdown, and so brought that knowledge back to Martin Guitar, handed it off to another mutual friend of ours, Tim Teal, and then me and Tim set about searching the universe of Pennsylvania for some place that could do it locally, because the freight from Nazareth to Finland would add thousands of dollars to every guitar. So we had to find somebody local who had that technology available, and we found that, and we're still using it to that day, or to this day.
Wow.
Very, very cool. So there will be Michael Dickinson's intellectual DNA will be remaining at the Martin Company long after he's enjoying his retirement. So I know the elephant in the room right now has to do with the change of spruce, with the introduction of a new to Martin spruce species coming in for general use throughout the line, which is named after the man that identified the natural hybrid species by the name of Lutz. And can you give us a bit of a rundown on the when, why, and how of Lutz spruce at Martin Guitar?
The when is now. The why. Okay, so let's first talk about what is Lutz spruce. Like you said, it is a hybrid. So you have white spruce on the one mountain, you have Sitka spruce on another mountain, and then like teenagers, they run down the mountain and commingle at night. So the faces of the mountain are on the so it's our Sitka, and then you might have a 10% Lutz, a 20% Lutz, a 30% Lutz, and then going up the other mountain, the other more and more white spruce entering into the thing. The truth is, 100 years ago, we may have been using it. We just didn't know because nobody identified it. Nobody said, "Oh, they just called it spruce." When Martin Guitar first started doing Sitka, they didn't even call it Sitka. They called it Western spruce. So, and has it hybrided before it was identified? Probably. Trees have been around for millions of years.
Yeah, and it wasn't identified until the 1970s or 1980s. So the naturalist who had, identified it. So it wasn't that long ago that they even knew it existed.
Yeah. So the truth is, if I locked you in a room with 10 guitars and told you 2 of them were Lutz, pick it out, I highly doubt you'd be able to do it because they look almost identical. They're very subtle differences, but you get subtle differences between Sitka spruce tops.
That's a good point.
The why is for so the Tongass National Forest, where most of the Sitka spruce in the world comes from, for the most part they're going to stop logging it. There might be some selected logging in basic.
That's in southern Alaska. That's the southern stretch of Alaska.
Yeah, there's southeastern Alaska, and the companies up there and different government bodies said, this is a very unique forest. At the rate you're cutting it, you're going to run out of wood. So they've opted to, let the forest regenerate for whether it be 100 years or 1,000 years, is a wonderful thing. So we've moved not we as in Martin Guitar, but we the music industry have moved a little more east and went into British Columbia, and there everything is run by indigenous people groups, and they hang out in the valley where Lutz spruce is. So that's what we have to use these days. Tonally, we've found very little difference. Visually, there's very little difference. And there again, like I said, 100 years ago.
I was just going to say there was also that forest was also hit really badly with a bark beetle infestation that was actually destroying a lot of young trees too. And I think that's what kind of started the panic. And that was several years ago. But I think that was also part of the forest and Forest Service saying that something, we have to protect the forest. I think that was one of the original inspirations for all of this happening. So you are now using Lutz basically as the main spruce, or what percentage of it remains Sitka? I mean, do you know those kind of numbers? Can you share those kind of numbers?
I can't share them because we don't know. It's going to be like year by year. It's literally going to be an order by order thing. We are going to place an order for X amount of guitar tops, and our vendors are going to say, okay, we can get you X amount of guitar tops. However, a certain percentage is going to be Lutz. So.
And other builders have been using this.
Yeah, other builders have been using this wood, and there again, it's cool. It's cool to point out now only because now it has a name. But 100 years ago, it was just called spruce.
Now, the project that happened several years ago where they were handing out spruce tops to different builders and everybody built one guitar, was that Lutz spruce or was that some other hybrid? Do you remember Martin made like one HD28 for that project?
That was what the Sonic... I think that was Sitka, because wasn't the project called the Sonic Sitka Spruce Project?
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah, you're right. That was the Sonic Sitka project.
And that was to just test, and I think that project's now defunct, but I think that was just to test how Sitka spruce reacts over years. So you were supposed to build a guitar and send it away or keep it, and then every so many years do a sound test on it and check the vibration levels and stuff.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Fascinating.
Let me ask you a question, Mike, that you might not be able to answer or might not want to answer, and you can just tell me that much if it's wrong. This whole thing about Lutz spruce, and you can buy a guitar from Martin now going forward. We're taping this program in late February of 2023, so somebody buying a guitar when they're listening to this show that's probably going to air sometime in March. Is it fair to say other manufacturers, say come the summertime, if somebody wants to buy a Taylor or a Gibson, do you suspect that either they're also going to be buying a guitar that could be made of Lutz spruce? And if so, do you think those manufacturers are being transparent as well, or is that just going to be called Sitka?
So it's a little tough for me to get into the minds of what other companies are doing, but I'm assuming that this is going to be a music industry move. So anybody involved in the music industry is going to be using, if you're going to be using spruce from British Columbia, there's always the chance of getting some Lutz spruce in there. We've chosen to take the path of announcing it without boring people over all sorts of legal rules and regulations when you're importing and exporting, especially with a hybrid species. Sometimes there's just not enough blank spaces on the piece of paper to fill in Sitka X Lutz, Spruciana, dot. So and there I'd have to do a lot more research to figure out what all the legal ramifications are. I mean, I tell people all the time. I said, people, hey, have you heard of this wood? It's called Moranti, and I go, Yes, I've heard of it. Well, why isn't Martin using it? I said, well, because 20 years ago it was called Philippine mahogany, and the Philippines were pretty much devastated through a variety of natural occurrences, and the wood there is just, it's taken them years to undo themselves from those situations, and it's just not commercially available right now. And one day in the future, it might be, and people go, wait, Meranti? Yes, Meranti is Philippine mahogany, and people come up with really cool names for wood all the time. I mean, the flooring industry is great at this. They will have one genus and species of wood and call it 15 different things, so people think there's 15 different types of wood out there, and it's not. So, as long as you have the same genus.
I was going to say, it's like the mattress companies that every mattress company has a different name for their mattress, and it's all made the same factory, and that way you can't go compare prices because they, our Princess
exactly.
Royal is somebody else's, whatever, exact same thing. Well, I will say Taylor has been using Lutz spruce on their 500 series for quite a while, and they're now expanding out into other series with it. But all the Taylor 500s have been Lutz for a while now, and I'm sure the other companies are, starting to use it too. So
yeah, and I don't think anybody is purposely doing anything wrong by whether or not they're calling it Sitka or Lutz or whatever. Like I said, that's something we'd have to go in and look at all the governmental rules to see what you actually need to call what you're using. I mean, I can speak for Martin Guitar. We've decided, we want to call it out as almost a secondary type of wood.
So it sounds like if I'm innocently taking your remark and I'm going to figure out what you're trying to say, if somebody wants to tell us, in April or May, I'm going to hold out and I'm going to buy a Gibson or a Blue Ridge at the end of the year because I want to guarantee I've got a Sitka top.
Yeah.
That's not guaranteeing that at all. It's just pushing the can down the road, and they're probably going to use the same. You're all picking from the same place, right?
Yeah, there's only X amount of wood dealers who deal for musical instruments. And we're all buying from the same places. We know each other. People will come up to me all the time and go, yeah, I bet you want Taylor to go out of business. I went, no, I have several friends who work there. And if they do go out of business, I hope they all go out with like Amazon and Google stock. So, so Bob has finally gone, yeah, Andy, I've given you the company, and now I'm closing it down, and here's Google stock for everybody, and they all buy beach houses and relax. I have no personal vendetta against any other guitar company out there. I mean, I've known the wood buyer for Fender. I know the wood buyer from Taylor. We work at the same companies. We visit the same forest. Yeah, it's maybe just on our in our wood area. We're not mean and nasty to each other. We leave that to salespeople. So.
Well, I've seen the beach houses along the Schuylkill River in Pennsylvania, and that would be a sore consolation if people out in Taylor are getting Pacific Ocean.
No, beach houses out in San Diego. I mean, 'cause you get great weather,
yes, exactly.
Lovely house on the beach.
Heavyweight beach houses, but Pennsylvania beach house is not quite the same. But and of course, you've dealt with a lot of other woods. We'd like to talk about some of those woods people don't think about. But right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about rosewood. And to begin with, I'd like to talk about the guitar you finally had made, the Martin guitar that you had made out of particular wood. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so when I hit 25 years at Martin Guitar, I had a guitar made out of East Indian rosewood back and sides, but it was a pattern I have never seen before. It's basically like quilted maple. This is quilted East Indian rosewood. I was in India.
Wow.
The company I was there visiting was actually cutting electric guitar blanks for a certain electric guitar company, and they split open this log, and when it opened up, it had this very unique pattern in it, and I jumped into a pit. on top of the log and started yelling, "Mine, mine, 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 mine." I then took pictures of it and I sent it to the wood buyer from that company. I went, "You're not getting this. This is mine. LOL." So it was quilted. It was like I said, it was this weird quilting pattern. And yeah, I think we got enough to make like 8 guitars. That was about it, and a couple extra fingerboard and bridges. But yeah, and haven't seen anything even notably close to it since then. The one thing it did do is sort of reinvigorated the company to look into something we had done 15 years earlier, which is we now call wild grain. Yeah, so we had purchased a load of wild grain rosewood, and it just sat there. And then when I brought this set in, somebody ran into the back and said, "Well, are we willing to use all this stuff?" And since then, we've been doing the wild grain. So my guitar sort of helped spur the whole wild grain scenario up. And since we're talking about East Indian rosewood, I notice online there's a lot of people talking about plantation rosewood. So I just want to explain plantation rosewood. People think it's rosewood trees that people have gone and cornrowed and just planted over and over and over again in long rows. And it's not like that. When we talk plantation rosewood, it's not the rosewood that's on the plantation, it's coffee or tea. So basically, there are coffee companies and tea companies over in India that will purchase large parcels of natural forest, and then they do their best to sort of fence it off. And then inside those parcels, they walk through, and that's where they will plant the tea plants and the coffee plants. So the trees that are coming off of plantation are natural forest trees. They just have, coffee and tea growing underneath them. So it's not like when we talk plantation mahogany.
Oh, wow.
Plantation mahogany is the English showed up in Central America, grabbed a bunch of mahogany seeds, and then went over to Fiji and other countries and planted all of those seeds in cornrows, and then just walked away and let them grow for 100+ years. So plantation in India is natural forest. Plantation mahogany is human intervention.
So could I make a quick comment? Would you agree, since East Indian rosewood is better than mahogany all the time, and it's a fact, does that mean plantation East Indian rosewood is better than plantation mahogany? Can I get you on the record while you're here?
Oh, no, I will not say that. We know too many people on the same forums who will quote that and email it to Chris Martin and then everybody else under the sun, and so
You didn't hear it here first, folks.
I take the opportunity every week to push my agenda that rosewood's better than mahogany.
Okay.
And you're no different, so I just had to
But
try.
everybody knows he's kidding. He's kidding.
Yes.
But so go back to your guitar for a second. What size is it? It's a long scale, short scale. What style was it in?
And is that the guitar that you brought to show us at Martin Fest the one year when it was at the Holiday Inn?
Yeah. It's a 000 12 fret, solid headstock. It's got the rosewood. It has this other wood that was this really cool funky log I found at a sawmill in Pennsylvania. It was called Wandu, which I believe is originally from Australia. And I just liked the way it looked, and it had this cool bubbly. So I used that for my bindings and inlays. I had used ebony from Republic of Congo that I had just pulled in for the fingerboard and bridge. It has, the pick guard is a particular shape of a very early 00018 we have in the museum, because it's not around the center ring, it's around the outside ring. And it is a solid headstock instead of a slotted, because there's a 12 fret dreadnought I bought for the museum that has a solid headstock, and I just like that look of the 12 fret solid headstock. The whole story of the D12 fret guitar is So we buy this guitar from this gentleman. He calls up, my uncle just passed away. He was friends with Mike Longworth. I buy the guitar. About 3 months later, this girl comes in and she demands to see her uncle's guitar. And I'm going, oh no. So I get the guitar, I show it to her, and I have the receipt in my hand. And I'm going, we bought it from this guy, is everything. And she just then starts crying hysterically about how she's getting married and her uncle was supposed to play this guitar at her wedding and he unfortunately passed away, and like the tears are just flowing down her face, and I'm starting to go, no, it's okay if you want to borrow the guitar, it's fine. And then so eventually what happened is what is it, something borrowed, something blue is the wedding thing. He had a strap in the case that was just like a blue cord. So I undid the cord, I handed it to her, and I said, mail it back to me after your honeymoon. And she did. So, yeah.
Wow. So, yes, Michael Dickinson has inside stories nobody else does yet again. Rosewood, varieties of rosewood now. And I know you were involved, like the time that Honduran rosewood started showing up on Martin guitars, at least again, and Guatemalan, which had not really been showing up on Martin guitars, and now Guatemalan has been embraced and is now showing up. I have a fantastic Guatemalan guitar that you guys made for me, Guatemalan rosewood guitar with that Adirondack spruce top that just gets better and better and better. And so tell us a little bit about the introduction or the embracing Guatemalan now that it's starting to be used on actual models, not just available for custom orders.
Embracing Guatemalan rosewood. So with Madagascar and the situation in Madagascar, I will give credit to Mr. Tim Teal, who I'm sure, have you interviewed Tim yet?
Yes, we had him on.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
Right.
We have, yep.
When we were down to maybe what we deemed 5 years worth of material left, me and Tim started looking and hunting. Honduras rosewood was, of course, what everybody deems as the best sounding wood. It's a little lighter pink hue in color, and the trees don't grow that big, so it's tough to get a lot of dreadnoughts out of them. We looked into Cocobolo, but of course it's very oily, it's very resiny. You have to sand it a little bit thinner, and some people have allergies to it. So while our dust collection systems were fine and kept everybody safe, it was just some people years ago, I think it was Dick Boak had a reaction to it. So we weren't really fond of using Cocobolo. And there again, the amounts available were just not huge. And so we just wondered, looking to different sawmills, talked to different people, and we eventually stumbled on a place that said, hey, we have this sort of rosewood. We can get you pretty decent supplies. We are the first company in this country that's harvesting this wood here. So yeah, we started slowly but surely acquiring it in, and we started off slowly with a couple of limited special editions, a couple of customs, to get the public, behind it. And then eventually we got to the place where, Madagascar had to go away and we needed the replacement. So we put this in place.
Wow.
Well, I'm a big fan. I am glad you guys are doing it. Now it's available on the new D28 Authentic, the latest version of the D28 Authentic 1937. So I think people would be very happy with those guitars. And I certainly really love mine a lot. And I know Lawrence Juber loves his a lot. And in fact, when I met backstage at a show he was doing in New York. We had both, like that week, just started negotiations on our own to have a Guatemalan Rosewood guitar made. So we traded notes. And like you said, you didn't go into the problems in Madagascar, but they were pretty severe politically and, in a limited supply. So
Yeah, I think
But,
by now everybody knows, between the politics and the illegal logging has been, in the news hundreds of times. And basically what Madagascar did is they went to CITES, which is a arm of the United Nations, and said, hey, we need help. And, so at this point, supposedly everything as far as logging in Madagascar is supposedly closed down, and I hope it is. I mean, who knows? One day, we haven't given up on them. I don't know in any of our lifetimes we'll ever see Madagascar rosewood again, but that's no reason to give up on the cause of Madagascar. And we're in contact with people we know there, and if there's ever anything we can do to help them out, we're there. And whether it's donating money or just joining them at some of these big political conventions to just say, hey, we support Madagascar, and we know they're doing the right things.
Speaking of Martin legacies, it's important to remember that a big part of Chris Martin's legacy is his environmentalism and his concern for the planet, concern for the environments where these exotic woods are coming from, and that was had a great deal to do with why this change happened at Martin. The other thing I want to mention too is, as you mentioned, people come after you, why don't you use this wood? A lot of people don't really fully understand how much wood Martin has to use compared to little individual guitar makers, and that there's lots of wood that you're simply not going to see in a Martin model because you just can't get that much quality wood, to fill the need, really.
Would you guys mind if I flip the script and turn the conversation 180 degrees?
Sure, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There was a podcast we did a few months back where Spoon was bragging about the time he helped vacuum our pool. What can you tell us about sinker mahogany? If you could see Mike's face, that was a stupid joke, but I still want to talk about sinker mahogany.
You know what? I think I heard that podcast.
Great segue.
I think I heard that podcast. So sinker mahogany. So we've done articles on it. Right now, we are quote unquote back to normal, but smaller countries with smaller gross domestic products aren't, and there were all sorts of supply chain issues, as everybody knows, and we all noticed in our grocery stores, one day a shelf would be empty, the next day there's stuff overflowing, and another shelf is empty, and supply chain issues are still happening around the world. So we get our sinker mahogany out of Belize. There's a company down there constantly pulling logs up out of the river. Right now, my biggest problem is getting it to the U.S.
Oh. Can you comment or give us your take on how it differs tonally?
So everything I have heard and seen is that it's got a better bass response than other mahogany, and a lot of people attribute that to the sediment over 100 plus years of sitting at the bottom of the water. You can, when you cut it, you can see in the pores there's little pieces of sediment, which and I think that just gives it a reflective quality where it bounces the bass better than a newer piece of mahogany.
Interesting.
For people who are not familiar with sinker mahogany in the first place, what exactly is it, and how did it get down there in the first place?
So sinker mahogany is wood that the British cut down in what at the time was British Honduras, is now Belize. And they used to cut the logs, drop them into the river, float them down the river, and load them onto boats to take it back to England. And the heaviest, densest logs, or logs that came up on a dry, shallow spot of the river, would get stuck and eventually sink to the bottom after being waterlogged. So we've recently started working in, well, I think it's got to be 6 or 7 years now. We started working with a company that was pulling these logs out of the river and slicing them up. When you're pulling the wood out of the river, it's hard to tell if some of them you can see old axe marks where the guys cut it. Some of them may have fallen naturally and may have been down under there, for 200 plus years, maybe 300. It's tough to tell.
From my limited experience of playing it firsthand and hearing other people play it, it does seem to have I would call it's a very full-bodied mahogany sound. And whether that's all bass or just a resonance thing. But I'm convinced it's not just, it just doesn't look different. It actually does sound different. And I think it's, I understand why people are willing to pay more for it. So I think it's a real thing. Does Martin have enough of it that you think it's going to be around, or is this going to be a sort of a limited time offer in terms of how long it's going to be around?
As long as we can find people who are willing to dive in rivers of Belize, we will have it. Is that 3 years? Is that 5 years? I don't know. So it's hard to say. People, ask me that question all the time. It's like, next year I want to order a custom out of sinker mahogany. Will you have it by then? Like, I don't know.
So it's that tenuous. It might not be there.
Yeah. It's one of the things about sinker mahogany is since in the years that we've been down there working with another company and two other companies, the one company that actually brings it out, the other company that mills it for us, is the company that pulls it out has changed 3 different times due to circumstance. The first guy got up in age and decided to retire. The second guy got sick and decided to retire, and now we have a third person down there who's taken over the reins of the company. So, and if people stop pulling it up, we're going to stop selling it. But hopefully, once we reach back to normal, the supply of the logs will start flowing again, and everybody can have their sinker mahogany Martin guitars, because sinker is better than East Indian Rosewood.
You've heard it here first, folks. You've heard it here first.
No. When I was in customer service, people would always call up and go, "I want to buy the best guitar. Is it?" And I always said, "Well, the D45." And they'd go, "Why?" And I said, "Because it puts the most profit into my company's pockets." And they would get very upset at me. I was like, "Look, best is it's hard to describe what best is. You need to buy the guitar for your particular situations, and if you're like me and Spoon and Maury, you need 12 or 13 guitars to explore, the entire Martin universe."
Good answer.
Yeah.
12 to start.
I did say, I got to say, long ago in the UMGF said that question was that, and I was sort of tongue-in-cheek saying, how many do you really need? I said 4. You need a Rosewood Dreadnought, a Mahogany Dreadnought, a Rosewood OM, and a Mahogany OM. And 3 or 4 different people did that and told me they did that. They actually, based on my post, they went out and bought whatever it was required to do that. You get their D28, their D18, their OM18V, and their OM28V. So you have to be careful, particularly when you're an expert like Michael Dickinson, what you say in public or to other people.
Yes, I know. My favorite ones was I was sitting at a guitar show, and it was sort of semi-slow. So I walked over to go talk to the people at the Taylor booth, and I'm just sitting down, and I picked up a guitar, and I strummed one chord. Like 16 people took pictures of that and posted it online.
Blasphemer.
Said, Yeah, and then I was at another guitar show, and Chris Martin showed up, and this was, when Claire was still in a stroller, and she saw one of these little mini Hello Kitty electric guitars. So Chris, being a good dad, buys it for her, and so there she is holding her little. I think it wasn't even it was plastic,
Yeah.
right? So Chris pays for it, hands it to her. Like everybody, cell phone technology was still had cameras, but was new, and there must have been 100 people with cell phones as Chris is pushing the stroller down the aisle, taking pictures of Claire holding this little, Hello Kitty guitar, and putting look, Martin guitar.
Why isn't she playing an 018?
Yeah.
So that's why they made the Claire guitar. Now we
Yes,
know.
that was.
Hey, we still have one of them.
Actually, I think that was probably years after the Claire guitar, because the Claire guitars were when she was born, and this was when she was in a stroller. So this would have been a year or two after the
Wow.
Claire guitar. Yeah.
But no, joking aside, I'm curious to know when you get the wood milled down to those very thin plates, and it goes into the acclimation room, which for people who've never been there is this enormous humidor warehouse, that smells absolutely fantastic. How long does wood season in there before it actually can be used, and does it change based on what kind of wood it is, the species, spruce, rosewood, mahogany, so forth?
The minimum time it can spend in the acclimating room is generally about 3 months. So there are certain species where, next to the acclimating room is the sawmill where we store a bunch of lumber. So it can, some of the lumber can be sitting out in the sawmill. Let's say it's out there 2 years, gets sawn up into those thin plates. That means its production has scheduled enough guitars to use that wood. So once those thin plates are cut up, they come in. We call it sitting on sticks, which is you let some air flow around it, and then you take it off of those sticks and you put it on a different pallet and you put it in line. So it's usually about 3 months from but there's also some wood that's been sitting in the acclimating room where I bought it in the 3 plates. It's probably been there, 5 to 7 years.
Oh, wow.
So when you say there's some wood, is that spruce and back and sides woods, or is it just happens
Yeah,
to be
that's
that way?
spruce, back and sides, neck stock.
Speaking about back and sides, is now a good time to ask you about fine veneers, Michael?
Sure, let's ask me about fine veneers. Fine veneers are wonderful. So for those of you who don't know, we started doing some fine veneer laminates on a lot of our Road Series instruments. So the fine veneer is a thin sheet. It's on the back, it's 1 millimeter thick, koa or zirconi with a core material in between the two pieces. The sides are 0.5 millimeter thick pieces with a core material. And we have that cut and pressed in the U.S., and we then ship it down to our location in Navajoa, and they build the SC guitars out of it, which are amazing instruments. If you don't own one, you should buy one. I'm drooling for one, but life gets in the way. It's
Sure
like
does.
my bank account, my house knows every time I have guitar money set aside, because first the water heater went out, so I had to replace my water heater. So we built up the guitar fund a second time, and my washing machine died, so I had to replace that. So once the guitar money gets back up, I will definitely be owning an SC guitar, and I have
Wow.
insider information on another instrument that's coming out soon that everybody's going to need 2 of. I'll have one of those. And just fingers crossed. So and there again, it all leads back to us trying to be as sustainable as possible. If you have a piece of wood that is a guitar back, which is, we'll just use round numbers. Let's say it starts off at approximately 1/8 of an inch thick. Well, out of that 1/8 of an inch, you can get 6 guitar backs made out of fine veneers.
Oh, true. That's a good point.
We hope to keep the precious woods we're using on our instruments. We love to keep them around for as long as we possibly can, so that everybody we play them, the next generation, the generation after that, and the generation after that have access to those same species. And one of the ways we can do that is definitely by using fine veneers.
Interesting.
And they sound really good too.
Oh, no doubt.
I have to say, I was not prepared for the fact that the Koa and the Zirconi guitars, because the back is lined with it as well, actually sound different. And I actually hear that pretty high thing you get out of Koa, and I hear a little more bass out of Zirconi. And at first I thought, well, maybe this is my imagination because it looks that way. But I think it's because they actually put the veneer on the inside of the guitar as well, on the inside of the back. And so that's what's actually reflecting the sound waves. Well, even if it's just a thin, millimeter. But I was very impressed with that. The 13s, the level 13 of the Road series, and of course the CS model, particularly really cool.
So, Michael, you talked about not predicting the future and how could you know? I'd like to ask you, when do you think you'll see the first SC13E variant in the museum?
It's already there.
Well, I mean, as a vintage piece.
Oh, as a vintage piece. Let's see. Okay. I will be retired or at least very old. If we could get like John Mayer to play one, I'm sure that would make sure it has to be in there as a vintage piece. If the first celebrity who plays one and then sells off all of their stuff, we will go to auction and I will be bidding on it if I'm still around. So I'm pretty sure within like 10 years, some celebrity will once again decide they need to, auction their stuff off for charity.
Kidding aside, though, that's a wonderful false story. And can you tell us a little bit about the museum and how you're connected to it?
So, I basically buy the guitars for the museum, and I help Jason honor with the displays and stuff and tracking the things. And there again, it was just, as I mentioned previously, it was one of those things where Chris wanted to open up a much larger museum, and I had read the Mike Longworth book 27 times and devoured as much information from Walter Carter and Fred Oster in Philadelphia and Jim Washburn and Richard Johnson and all these guys who had just spent decade after decade just researching old guitars, and where I am very, very Martin centric. Some of those people, what they know about Martins, they also know that much about old Gibsons, and they can tell you, screw hole locations on old Fenders and all that sort of stuff, and that boggles my mind. But when it comes to Martin guitars, I just did everything in my power to talk to and read everything I could about old Martin guitars, and when Chris asked for a volunteer to start taking over the purchasing of these guitars, I just went me. I'll do it. And he said okay, and we've purchased a lot of really cool musical instruments. I said there's that we got the first stamped D28. I went up to an auction and met Richard Gere, who is 4'2" in real life.
I want to meet him.
So so
There's 6'5", Mike Dickinson.
6'5", and then at the show I had dress heels shoes on, which had probably a half an inch heel or so. So and literally the poor guy came up to my belly button, but he's a guitar geek. So I said, hi, I'm Mike Dickinson. I work at Martin Guitar. I buy guitars for the museum. He was just as staring straight up at me, going, "Oh, that's so cool! You guys need to buy this guitar. This I want to come down and see it." Blah, blah, blah. And it was really cool. And yeah, so we bought that one from him, and we bought one of the original specials guitars that sort of led into the production of the D45.
Nice.
I got a chance to bid on Roy Rogers' OM45. I bought another OM45 at an auction, a couple of D28s, D18s. I know there was they put a poll or something on the UMGF one day with, so like, what is your work guitar and how many do you have at work? And I typed in pre-war 120, post-war 8,642. Because I was lucky enough to have a warehouse full of them at the time. So yeah.
Boy, restringing day must really stink for you.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I don't want to speak out of turn, and I think Spoon would agree with me, but you talked a few minutes ago about your guitar fund and then the washing machine breaks and stuff. I think you got bigger problems. If you're buying all these guitars for the museum, that's where your money's going, Michael.
Well, I'm lucky enough to be able to spend Chris Martin's money on those.
Never mind.
Personal, the personal fund is not OM pre-war D45 level. I wouldn't even know what to do with a pre-war. I would be, if I owned a pre-war D45, I would be so afraid to play it that I'd probably just lock it up somewhere. So the guitars I have in my collection right now are player beaters. Nothing. The coolest thing I have is my custom. Everything else is just a couple guitars I built over the years and some beaters I picked up here and there.
Nice.
Well, Laurie bought Maury a D45 for Christmas, so he now is afraid to play that.
It's true.
Yeah.
I've learned to play it in the case.
Yes. You got to get that first nick in it sometime.
Nope.
And then you bring it back down, and we'll buff it out for you and get rid of it. And then the second or third one, you won't cry as hard.
Yeah, it's like the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I have the OM28V.
Oh, yeah.
That looks like we all drove over it with my car, and the D45 is the polar opposite. And I get to kind of pick between both of them when I'm done a busy workday. But that D45, it's pre-World War IV, so it technically is a pre-war guitar.
Even pre-World War III, for that matter. So, yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes, indeed. Now, I know you said Martin's back to normal now after the pandemic and all that, but you have not been going overseas yet. Do you have any trips planned? Do you have anything in the works?
Yeah, I'm getting ready to head to Africa. Actually, I started off this morning at the doctor's office to make sure I was up to date on my shots and pick up all the anti-malaria meds I need, and then had my blood work done to make sure I'm healthy enough to travel. So beginning of March, I will be heading over to Africa to go look at wood.
Wow.
Excellent. Well, we spoke about sustainability and the fact that you get to go to places like jungles to look for wood. We haven't really spoke much about domestic woods other than talking about the Sitka that comes from southern Alaska. Martin certainly has a lot of domestic woods. They don't use them that often. But what are some of the American, like United States of American grown woods available from Martin if somebody wanted a not just a guitar made in America, but wanted the trees made in America? What do you have, and how popular are they in terms of custom orders and that kind of stuff?
So first, let's not forget Hawaii is part of the United States, and we do a lot of koa instruments.
Quite so.
Yeah, with ukuleles and guitars. Sometimes it's because it's not part of the continent, we forget about that. But so we do use a lot of koa. Other woods, of course, cherry, which has been our FSC certified guitars for as long as we've been FSC certified, since I think what the first time we did that was in '97. We've used cherry.
That being the Forest Stewardship Council, by the way.
Yes. And of course, we've done lots of walnut guitars. We've done, there's several different species of walnut that grow throughout the U.S., and we've done pretty much every species. And that comes and goes in popularity. I mean, what we've noticed is like we can sell 1,000 walnut guitars, and then people who want them sort of cool off, and then 6 months or a year will go by, and then all of a sudden walnut gets popular again. We've done sycamore in the past. Of course, there's 8 different variety of maples, not just species, but you have, your bird's eye maple, your quilted maple, your all the different names for flame, whether you call it flamed or curly or tiger or fiddleback. We have all of those varieties in stock, and why we don't make as many of those as we do, mahogany instruments. We do constantly, steadily. You see them rolling out of the factory, as I walk through every day. You can see those all going through, and it's one of those things where you're constantly on the lookout for any species that is cool looking and sounds good. At one point, I brought in close to 200 different new species that we went through testing to see how they would work. And now we're going back and looking at those, because some of them were just, lookalikes to other woods. So, why, buy a mahogany looking wood if you can get mahogany? And now we're going, okay, well, if mahogany gets sourced, we now want to start looking at mahogany wood. So we're going back and revisiting that sort of stuff. As far as American woods, holly we do, but holly's mostly like inlays. The trees are usually small, so we'll do like inlays and bindings out of holly. Spruce, you said spruce, which can come from the U.S. Off the top of my head, I think that's about it as far as American woods.
So any of our listeners that might be thinking, why don't you just make all of your guitars from like the neighborhood and walk around, Nazareth and Lehigh Valley and just build everything there? It's not as easy as that sounds.
No. And everybody knows there's another guitar company that's doing urban forestry, which is fine. Without getting overly scientific, trees in general like living together for the most part. And when you plant a tree and it sits along a pathway in a park, and 50 or 60 years later it no longer sustains life, and you cut it down, that does not mean that tree is good for building guitars. You got to cut the tree into lumber, and you got to look at the grain, and you got to look at the stability. Is there any rot? Was there any wormholes? We get people all the time who call up and go, I have an old walnut tree that sat on my grandpa's farm for 300 plus years, and that if you cut that tree down, somewhere in the middle of it there's going to be a large hunk of metal because somebody nailed something to it at one point or another. And the sawmills I work with in the area, the last thing you want is a very large bandsaw blade hitting an old piece of rebarb, because things just go flying all over the place. And even a lot of times, if the piece has been there so long and it rusts really bad, some of their handheld metal detectors won't even pick it up, and they run into it and it just goes bang.
Wow.
And it's horrible. So yeah, a lot of our, when people are cutting lumber, they're cutting lumber for, your woodworker, your door manufacturer, your furniture guy. And when you cut wood for guitars where it has to be quarter sawn, it's a whole different resawing scenario. So they need to make sure that they're not going to lose money in the hopes of possibly one day selling a guitar set. They need to make sure that the log is guitar quality and that they can resaw it and make some money out of it.
It's not just the species of wood. It's also, like you said, the grain has to be correct. For the stability's sake of it, because this is particularly when you're talking about solid wood guitars, you're talking about extremely thin pieces of wood that are going to be put under enormous amounts of stress. And like you said, you don't want to get scientific about it, but there's a great deal of science and engineering that has to come into play. There's that famous story where Fred Martin said that his father had cut down a spruce tree in their own backyard, assuming it was going to make great tops, and it was worthless, and they just used it to make bracing because it just wasn't viable. Let's see. We've covered a great deal of topics here, and a great deal of Michael's areas of expertise. And when you look back at everything you've done, what are the things that really stand out to you that you're going to take with you when you leave Martin Guitar, and that you're going to think back on as some of your favorite achievements or favorite things you've experienced while you were at CF Martin and Company?
Besides us.
Besides hanging out with the unofficial Martin Guitar Forum and hauling guitars throughout the factory so that Todd can record himself, and then talking to our IT guys because it doesn't matter how much time Todd had to prepare, he forgot a cord somewhere at home. And I had to run to our IT department and go, hey, do you have a spare this type of cord so Todd can do it? Or, oops, Todd forgot his battery again. He has to plug in. That sort of stuff is going to stay with me every time I see Todd. Gosh. As far as what will stay with me is it's weird little things. Like I mentioned earlier, the story about my custom and that girl who cried at her uncle's guitar. That will stay with me. When I went to grade school, the secretary's name, I better not say it, we'll just say Mrs. Smith. And our vice president of human resources at Martin Guitar was Mrs. Smith's daughter. And I used to call her by her first name only. And somebody looked at me and said, you need to address her as Mrs. Smith. And I looked at them right in the eyes in front of Mrs. Smith, and I said, she is not Mrs. Smith. Her mom is Mrs. Smith and will forever be Mrs. Smith. This is always going to be Debbie. And Debbie just laughed hysterically over that. So that conversation, diving into the pit at the Rosewood mill to get a small section of a log to use on my guitar.
That's awesome.
Yeah, being at different auctions and having lunch with Steve Earle.
Wow.
I was sitting down having lunch with Steve Earle, and we used to have that little pizza place across the street, and I'm sitting there, and I'm having lunch with Steve, and I just start laughing, and he goes, Mike, what are you doing? I said, nobody else in this restaurant knows there's a Grammy Award-winning artist in the building, and if you started singing right now, everybody would figure out who you are, but right now, nobody knows who you are. And I found that funny as could be. Yeah.
That's awesome. We don't have the royalty money to sing that song right now, but I appreciate where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Thank you.
Okay, Michael, I have a two-part question for you. Besides the safari hat that Spoon gave you years ago, what is the best gift you ever received at Martin Guitar, and why is it Lori's apple pie?
So, me and your wife have had a very unique relationship.
Oh.
Mostly based around food.
Mostly?
Yes. The rest of the relationship was based around the fact that she would always forget my name and then call somebody in sales and go, the really tall guy that buys the wood. And eventually that person would then email me that, Lori was asking me a question about something or telling me, hey, call Maury. It's when is your birthday?
It just passed.
Well, I guess she didn't do that this year. It just passed a couple weeks ago, January 13th.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, I thought it was in January. It's a month ago. Well, happy birthday, belated.
Well,
You
thank
tell
you.
her she's slacking.
Well, not just that, but you're actually right on target. But right church, wrong pew. Spoon's got a birthday coming up in a couple weeks now.
Oh, well, happy birthday to you, too.
But you knew that.
Thank you very much. I still want to hear about this apple pie that I've seen.
You're now going to be M2 premium grade.
Ah.
Oh, it's true. It's true.
Oh, what was the... So, I know at Martin's on Main, every year we've done it. We talk about guitars, and I always mix food into it and tell people that you will buy them free food if they buy a guitar through you at Martin's on Main.
Yes.
And I've gone over pierogies, shoe fly pie, I think it was, and some Moravian sugar cake, and several other foods over the years. And I think the apple pie was, well, I believe I was still in customer service and you needed a part, like a replacement electronics or something, and I said, sure, but it's going to cost you. And when you finally showed up, you had a pie in hand.
That's
and
correct.
then brownies once, I think.
Brownies might have been around a birthday, but the apple pie started when Lori and I first became a Martin dealer. We thought it'd be so cute. We're going to make these, well, I'll say we, but all I did was bring them in the car. Lori made these homemade apple pies from scratch, and you should have seen the amount of time and mess that she went through to make maybe 6 or 7 of them. And then the next Christmas season came along, and she's like, well, I can't not do it again, and it was 13. And after the 3rd year, she's like, I cannot make 40 pies. You and I know too many people at Martin now. Look what you started. And I think the whole thing fell apart, and I don't want to get in trouble on this broadcast. And I think only Mike Dickinson got one year because she couldn't make a bunch, and she couldn't not give Mike a pie. That's what I remember.
Oh, yes. Well, and tell her I appreciate it, and I miss them. And yes, that was always my, because I think the very last year it came in with those little pressure sensors that you put on your guitars when you're shipping them to let them know if it took a bang.
Oh, yeah.
You had coated the entire box with those pressure sensors.
That is true.
To make sure that it got there without any bumps or bruises to the pie.
It's hilarious.
Good times, Mike. Good times.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Michael, you don't know what the music means, but we do. I think we're out of time.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much for having me.
Well, and thank you for being on here. We've been wanting to do this for a very long time,
Yes.
so I look forward to seeing you soon. As NAMM's coming up, and our trip to the factory will be coming up, so we'll catch up then.
All right, sounds good.
Thank you so
Look
much,
forward
Michael.
to seeing you still.
From all of
All
us
right.
at Maury's
Belly
Music.
rub.
I'm sorry.
All right.
From all of us at Maury's Music.
No, I
Thanks
just
for
said
listening.
give Lexi a belly rub. Hear you later.
I don't know what he said, but it sounded like something about a belly rub.
And a dog.
Yes, I said
dog.
give Lexi a belly rub for me.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I will give
All right.
Lexi a
All
belly
right,
rub
this
for
is-
you.
From all of us
Now
at
Oh, yeah,
Maury's
don't worry
Music.
about it. Like I said,
Just
Maury
do.
can cut out either one.
From all of us at Maury's Music, give Lexi a belly rub. Now you're both quiet?
Scratch you later.
This has been a presentation of Maury's Music, your trusted source for Martin and Blue Ridge guitars. Find us online at maurysmusic.com.